accommodate that. So that was our understanding of what you guys were looking to do. And so we had put together on our side very formally here that we would develop a needs assessment that would include developing 3 conceptual floor plans that would be slight variations on the program that we just described. And then we would review those with you, and you would select one of those for further refinement. And then we would take that, and then we would refine that floor plan and develop a site plan also from that, on how that actually lays out on the site and how the vehicular movements would actually occur. That's the 3rd bullet point we have on there. And then once we reviewed that with you for both the site plan and floor plan, then we developed conceptual level drawings. So we're now going from kind of a block diagram to more of a conceptual site plan, conceptual floor plan. It's going to actually have, the walls, door swings, opening, windows, and those sorts of things on it. And review that with you. We would expect you guys to have some comments. We would incorporate those comments into that, and then we would develop a perspective of the building to try to describe what the exterior character might be. And then we would develop a cost estimate associated with it, which would, it would be built on the site plan, floor plan, perspective, narrative that we would use to describe the different assemblies and systems that are going to be in the building. And again, taking into account what's being hardened and what you're getting from the state as far as funds go. And that would typically take about 8 to 12 weeks. It's less about the amount of time it takes us to do it. It's really getting the review in with you and making sure that you guys feel comfortable with the plans as we're progressing from one step to the next. So that's, and I think when I initially came out and met with you guys, I had walked you through some visuals of a needs assessment to kind of show examples of what that would be like. This is kind of the written bullet points associated with what I presented in the presentation when it came back. I don't know, might have been June of last year. It was a while ago, I think.
Yeah, it was about June. So, one of the things that we have to clarify on there, and it's really more after we get into this process, if we, but I believe with the grant, and you guys have dealt with these grants quite a bit, we have to maintain 52% of the original floor plan to stay within the grant restrictions, don't we?
I don't know if they have a specific requirement percentage area. What I would propose we do, if you guys would like to move forward with this option, is actually reach out directly to our contacts in the state who we work with and run this concept through. Because part of my concern would be technically the fire station as it is now is part of the state demo. The city hall, which would become part of the future fire station, is the remaining portion. In the spirit of the grant, that it probably would be allowed, but it's something we would, as part of our due diligence, going to this, we would want to talk to them about in more detail. But they are pretty specific. You're not allowed to tear down the whole station until it's funded.
Why are we talking about tearing down part of it anyway?
Sorry, that was kind of broken. What was that? If it is asking why we're looking to tear down a portion of the structure. So it sounds, I think I heard that question earlier. So it sounds like you might want to do a little bit of a recap of the assessment that you did from a seismic review standpoint.
Yeah, the moving the vehicle bays back and more to the west was kind of a desire to be considered, to give us more. Currently, if we pull a vehicle out onto the front ramp and we're trying to work around that vehicle, we're blocking the sidewalk and we're right up against the traffic. And so it was kind of if the vehicle bay is not engineered to be able to be seismically upgraded, it would be better to remove that portion, move it back and to the west. But then when we started looking at the area of the property lines, we knew that we weren't going to be able to get that many bays over, and that's when it went to the whole 3 pull-throughs and 2 non-pull-throughs. Somebody's echoing.
There we go.
So,
Yeah, just to kind of give a recap on the seismic assessment that we did. What we ended up doing is currently the buildings are just touching in the direction southeast corner there. And we are proposing to isolate the 2 structures as they currently stand. If you were to just, let's just say you were just doing a seismic upgrade, no changes. The city hall building would be its own standalone structural system, and then the current fire hall. It is, you know, when we were on site, there was damage from grade. The structure is going to need a significant amount of work to accommodate a seismic upgrade. And through conversations with Jamie, we kind of moved towards, you know, if we're going to use this much expansion and getting the site to work and expansion of bunk rooms and stuff, you're likely going to end up tearing the building down almost to strengthen it structurally, and you're going to be limited to the skeleton that you have. So that's kind of where we started. I don't know if that's necessarily where we have to go, but that's where we kind of started our recommendation based on the current RNA of current structural systems and the fire station. I believe also, we talked about increasing bay door size. There's just not any room to do that.
I believe, if I remember correctly, it wasn't just so much increasing the bay door sizes versus how close it was how close together the bay doors were. It wasn't going to allow for structural supporting between the doors that were going to be significant enough for the seismic, if I remember correctly. You guys were talking maybe about doing a solid beam all the way across the top to try to reinforce that, but the problem with that is if that beam comes down, we lose all 4 bays. So.
Yeah, the piers and through the doors are very narrow on this repair station. Yeah, I pulled up the seismic assessment. I'm just looking at it off camera over here. So those doors look like they are 10, maybe 12 feet wide, which is pretty substandard for fire facilities now. And then the leg looks like it's probably between the overhead doors, 18 inches, maybe a little bigger than that.
Yeah, 12 inches.
So should they play on a new facility, those, from a structural standpoint, those legs usually end up being about 2.5 to 3.5 feet, just for what we need to be able to adequately brace the roof structure and the walls. And then there's another piece that comes into play as well, and that is the NFPA requirements or clearances around the rigs. So right now, I don't know if you were going this way or not, Jamie, but I suspect you may be a little squeezed by how close those rigs are in there, parked together.
Yeah, we're not meeting the NFPA, but it's also a pre-existing building, so.
Yeah.
Any other questions about that so far?
Mhm.
Okay. One of the questions that I had for you guys was, when you guys come out to do the evaluation, the trying to understand, because we gave you guys a drawing before, and that was kind of just if we could have everything in the world, that's what that would be, you know. So trying to understand how to stay within the constraints of the property lines, but still accomplish the minimum the district needs to be able to function as especially as a headquarters fire station. We would obviously have to have quite a bit of input in that process, I would assume.
Yeah, every step of the way here, we would be, the first piece is determining what your programmatic requirements are. So if I understand you correctly, you're saying we're asking for all of those. But if that doesn't fit on site, then that might change what we're actually looking for. So we can quickly diagram that out on site to be able to say, hey, look, if you're going to preserve Boulder Street, this is what you can actually put there. And work backwards as opposed to like we're moving the property line to be where we want it to be, and we're building the facility that we need.
Okay.
I think the city manager kind of indicated that he was willing to move that.
Yeah, he said that the street didn't have to exist, and that we could extend our property line all the way to the sidewalk of the community center. So.
Jamie, we were proposing 3 different conceptual designs. So, we could develop 2 that are kind of the new structure and the road goes away. And a third one could be, all right, if the road is preserved, that's what this would be, right? So that we can kind of show you those before you make a decision on which direction you want to go. That's a possibility if you're not sold on the idea of vacating that road.
Yeah, we can get an official confirmation from the city that, yep, for sure, there's no problem with that road being closed, and then we can go from there on that point of it. What about campaign assistance and 3D rendering once we do pick a floor plan, and things that I know you guys have provided other places I've been to assist with us being successful in educating the public of why we're doing this and what they're going to receive as the responders come to them and as they use this facility in the community.
Absolutely. We can help all of that. So the pieces that we proposed on so far, basically, we should site plan, a full plan, cost estimate, a perspective of it, and at least our understanding was we were working directly with you. You're providing feedback on that, and that's how that's actually evolving. One of the ways that we have pretty regularly worked is that once the site plan and the floor plan has been set, we actually have a public outreach meeting. And the public outreach meeting is a means of soliciting input from the community and what the aesthetics of the exterior look like. And that has 2 things. Number one, it starts to get the community invested in this. If you're going to ask for a bond measure, or them to support a bond measure for the funding of this, they start to get invested in it because they're excited about the way it's going to look. I provided input. I know that they're doing what I asked them to do, and so I'm going to support this. So we don't currently have in the proposal doing public outreach. We didn't think that that's what you guys wanted to do quite yet, but we have done that. We've done it regularly. And those, on a typical project, that might be anywhere from 1 public outreach meeting to, say, 3. And so the first one could be more educational, and that could be, hey, look, these are the challenges associated with the existing building. It doesn't need, seismic code, so it's going to need to be seismically hardened. It was built at such and such period of time. There have been, 20 years of code cycle changes, and now it doesn't meet energy code anymore. And the building wasn't built at a time when ADA existed, so it doesn't meet ADA. And it was also built at a time when thermal properties were different than they are black and white things, and I have no doubt that it doesn't mean anything. So those are things that the community may not necessarily be picking up on, and that's something that can be, it can be really convincing for the community on why it makes sense to actually replace the structure, add on to it to improve it. And so the first meeting could really be talking about the efficiencies of the building, seismic assessment was done, and this is the game plan the fire district is wanting to do. And if that's tearing out a portion of the building and add on to it, then that's what's communicated in the first meeting. And then whether it's at the first meeting or at the second meeting, then the next thing that we would do with the community is we could bring in images of precedent stations, other civic structures that are on the coast, and we would vet all these with you first. So anything that the public's going to see, you've already seen, you know what they're going to see, and that also gives you the ability to police it. So if we show you 25 different images, and you said, I don't want to, let's get rid of those 5 there, then the public sees 20. They don't know anything different. So they get these 20 images, and we ultimately would share with them that this is the way the site's been developed, this is the way the floor plan's been developed, and it's been developed for the operational needs of the district, the best suited for the community. And we're not asking your input on that, but we do have these over here for reference. We can walk them through, or the chief, Jamie, you can walk them through the floor plan or site plan or tag team, however that ends up being. And then we pivot to, after that, we reveal to them this is what the current concept design is, these images. And we have an interactive session where whether we read things, green dots, red dots, if we're meeting in public. If we're not, we do a survey. We just did this for the city of Fulton, and we used a survey office to be able to solicit people's input. But basically what ends up happening is that those 20 images, we find out the ones that they don't like, we find out the images they do like. And you just narrow down to, like, okay, what we see is you like, I'm just going to make up some stuff, you like brick buildings with pitch roofs and metal roofing, and you like bullet, whatever the thing is, right? That's the consensus of what this group is. And so then we would go back, instead of developing just one exterior perspective, we could actually develop maybe a couple of gradations and again show you, and then you guys could weigh in on, I like that one, let's go with that one. And both of those perspectives, concepts, would basically take in what the community is sharing with us. You vet out of the two, this is the one that I like best. When we go back to the community in the next meeting and say, here's what came out of that conversation we had for class. So here we got blue, this is our roof, this pitch, this brick on it, this is how it's done this. And so, again, depending on how many of these meetings you actually want to have, you can kind of build the story as you go along with the idea of, all right, now we're going to ask for money for support the lawn measure, such and such month. You can also couple with that, the first meeting, or maybe keep all of them. You can actually open the station up for tours, so that people can kind of, instead of having a presentation and somebody talking to them about this is leaking and that doesn't meet energy code and blah, 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 they can actually kind of see the conditions firsthand. Somebody can give them a tour and kind of realize that a trucking hazard is coming into the building and whatever the issues are. They can see this stuff firsthand.
Okay. Yeah, not to mention safety codes like sprinkler systems, fire alarm systems. We don't have any of that.
That comes into the NFPA reg. So there's a number of NFPA regulations that are recommended for fire stations. So sprinklers is one of them. 5 feet clearance all the way around apparatus is another. Proper storage of turnout gear. Any self-contained room that has proper ventilation. Screen from UV light. There's a whole, it's like ventilation where you have room space, separating from the living quarters. So a whole slew of things, and I have no doubt you guys are making the best of what you can with your station, but it probably doesn't have all the things that modern station would. And the public's not going to know that stuff, right? That's some of the stuff that they'll be very interested in learning about.
Yeah, no, I'm very familiar with that stuff. There are lots of them on my mind.
Other Jamie, other things that we can do as far as the campaign goes, any of the,
Yes.
our report would be the result of the scope that we kind of outlined. And so any of the images, we can actually make available to you, so you can actually make posters of those, or you can have us make posters. You can do door hangings, all sorts of things, so like, well, how do you get the word out and try to, get people to come to the, public outreach meetings, and how do you continue to have the conversation as you get closer and closer to election day? So we can help in however capacity you want us to.
Okay, great.
Okay, great.
Do you guys have any more questions for them?
No.
Do you guys have anything more for the board?
I don't think so. I think we were somewhat impromptu here, and so we didn't really prepare anything. And if there's anything you guys want to see as visuals or get a better understanding of something, we would be happy to speak with you again and share with you if you guys had something you wanted to see that was an example of what that end result would be.
Okay. Yeah, if they want to see anything, then I'll get a hold of you and make that request. So, okay, then in that case, I think we're gonna jump off and go to meeting and then have a discussion about the proposal and then whenever the board gives me direction, I'll get in touch with you and let you know.
That sounds great. Thanks for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, that should take care of the echoing now.
I was trying to volume up and down as much as I could.
Yeah.
That was the biggest problem, was getting into a sound loop.
Yeah. Well, I understand the tearing down the old building now. That makes, it makes sense. I hate to see it happen, but I also know from remodeling that store building 3 times that a lot of times it's way cheaper just to tear it down and start over.
And it may not be a full tear down, and that's why I had them modify the proposal to a partial to full, is because they're gonna double check, but I believe there's a percentage that we have to keep intact of the remodel portion in order to stay within the grant restrictions of the seismic grant. And that seismic grant goes up to $2.5 million. So that's a pretty decent chunk of the project when you're looking at the fact that if they have to pull siding off to reinforce all the walls, then the siding goes back on under the grant, not under the district's purchase of it. Same thing with the roof. If they got to tear the roof off to reinforce all the structure, the structural engineering of the roof itself, and make it seismic with tie downs and etc., then the roof goes back on under that grant. So, but there's certain portions, and we'll get those specifics once we get further into the deciding what we're going to do. So, at this point, I think the biggest thing is understanding what the district wants to do in terms of do we purchase this property and, for lack of a better term, retrofit the station to a modern station that's going to keep the community's needs for the next 50 years, or do we not, and we look at other options? I think that's the biggest question of the day, because this proposal's got a financial impact on it. And so if we say, yeah, we're gonna spend this money and we're gonna go through this proposal, and then 4 months from now things change and we decide to completely go to a different option, that money is spent.
Yeah.
So
True.
Well, so, and they may already have, and I just don't remember it being in the original report, but have they come up with estimates for us of cost to do all that?
So based off of the current structures that are here now as they stand, and that would be keeping the vehicle bays as they are, keep in mind. It was 1.8 million to just seismically harden the structures, and that's City Hall portion and the fire district portion. So if we have them evaluate the property and provide us 3 floor plans, those numbers will change based off of those floor plans up to the 2.5 million that the grant would allow for.
And based on your past experience, if we, say we tore out the vehicle part of that side, left the 2-story part alone
Yeah.
with the upstairs, when they go to rebuild it, will the seismic portion of that rebuild be covered under the grant?
No.
Whatever they have to do for seismic?
No, only the portions that currently exist here would fall under the grant. Anything that's new construction would be for us, but it's gonna be programmed into the build, so it's not gonna be a new cost, it's gonna be part of the original construction, if that makes sense.
Right.
So for instance, right now, if we were to harden structure the vehicle bay, they would essentially have to break those vehicle bays all the way down and then rebuild them back up in the way that the seismic would. Whereas if it was a whole new construction, it's just built that way. There's no tear down, there's no modifying.
Right.
It's part of the plan. So it doesn't make it cheaper. It just makes it a little bit more streamlined.
Certainly a lot of options.
So they'll give us, like they said, they'll give us floor plans based off of our needs. And now, I've had 2 different conversations where I've gotten the same answer, that Alder Street can be closed and the district property can be extended all the way over to the sidewalk. That helps because when we're talking about having 3 pull-through bays for large vehicles, that's going to need to be extended over that far in order to get that swing on these fire apparatus, because this back street has an angle to it.
Right.
And so we have to be very careful that we don't create a scenario where 15 years from now we buy a ladder truck, and because of the entry onto the highway, the ladder truck is best suited in that last bay. However, we can't put it in that last bay because the swing coming off of the street behind the station doesn't allow for the turning radius to get the vehicle into that bay. So those are things that they'll look at too and tell us, hey, you might want to be careful because a 44-foot long, fire truck's not going to be able to turn into this bay. And that's a big concern. That we basically set a building up with a failure point right off the bat.
Right.
So.
How about if we appoint a committee to negotiate with the city, so to speak? See where we're at with that.
So the benefit of a committee would be that you could meet a little bit more flexibly because you don't have to schedule up a forum of 5 people. It'd be 2 people, because if you go 3, it's a quorum.
Right.
And so I would imagine it would be 2 board members and then members from the district. Obviously, probably myself. I would definitely want Eric because he'd be doing a lot of the consulting as the maintenance facility officer with Mackenzie. And then anybody else, members like Rick, so we have volunteer input, could be on there too. You don't want to get too big of a committee because then you get too many opinions and you never come to any answers.
Yeah.
So,
I just think we need to nail these costs down closer to see if we're going to purchase this thing, then what's involved with it. I know what they want, but
well, the biggest thing is we got to actually get formal discussions started.
Yeah.
There's been no formal discussions yet. It's all been, we're thinking this and we're thinking that. We really need to sit down at the table and say, okay, we're really interested in the idea of purchasing this property. What are we really going to be looking at here? And have it's really a 2-parted conversation because obviously, the city who owns the property currently is going to have their needs, but we're also looking at putting a bond forward to be able to take care of not only this, but our new vehicle apparatus schedule that we're going to have to build. And so there's costs associated that are going to affect the taxpayers
exactly.
in this overall project. And so when we sit down at the table, we can't just ignore that and say, okay, yeah, let's just do this, when we've got associated costs that are gonna affect the bottom line at the end of the day. So it's gotta be a discussion that's gonna have to be had.
I think a committee would be a good idea for that. We can narrow things down and then see what the costs are gonna be.
It's really up to the board.
Well, and then you don't have the whole board negotiating with the whole city council. and
Exactly.
It turns into a melee.
Yeah.
Although eventually it will be because.
Well, eventually, yeah, but, you know, I would imagine the city would have a couple of people, you know, the city manager and the facilities guy, and,
Yeah. Be a good time to get involved in it, seeing as how that we're,
The nice thing to keep in mind is the committee can't make decisions.
Right,
So
right,
anything
right.
that gets discussed in a
Right.
meeting still has to come back to the
us, yeah.
board at an official meeting
Yeah.
to be approved. We could talk about it all we want, and then it's basically, okay, but now we've got to actually go to an official forum in order for it to be voted on and actually approved by the whole board. So the committee just kind of keeps the legwork going so that decisions can be brought once a month. Because otherwise, if you're trying to do it as an entire board, you're only going to get once a month. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So, that's where a lot of steering committees come out of and say, okay, we need to have somebody doing the legwork and then bring us the details. So,
I think it's a good idea.
So Jamie, on this plans that you have here, these, you know, on the section 3,
yeah.
is this plan including all of this also, the city hall part?
Yeah, and again, I really want to point out that when I drew these drawings on the computer, and you can see that I started, the first page that you flip to is the actual current city hall floor plan that I took from their blueprints and transferred over, but then modified a couple of things where the ADA compliances are going to come in. I'm telling you now, just go ahead and start the expectation that we're going to be held to all the ADA compliances, and that is going to include probably an elevator, even if there's no public space upstairs. And it's because I've seen multiple districts before us who did try to get that taken off of the requirements and were unsuccessful. So that's the one thing to do. So when you look at the first floor of the drawing here, you can actually still see that outline of the city hall portion on that left corner there. And then you can see where there's a gap between the two buildings. It was filled in because the front door of City Hall actually extends out quite a bit further than where the wall right here on the training room actually starts. And that's where we have the gap where there's a heat pump right outside the wall there currently. Now, this drawing was designed as if we could have everything that we wanted, this is what it would be. This is not what our station is going to end up looking like. This is about a $12 million project, okay? And I just don't see that happening. So we're gonna have to sit down and say, here's what we would love to have if we could just have everything, but what do we actually have to operate as a functional emergency services response agency? And keep in mind that it's really a public safety building because currently we have law enforcement housed out of this facility. We have the private ambulance company housed out of this facility, as well as the fire district. So this isn't just a fire station, it's really a public services facility for the community. So that's something to kind of keep in mind, is that we're not the only ones that are going to be included in this planning to some degree, and we may be able to offset some of our costs as well, because if they're going to continue to house themselves here, there's going to be costs associated for their areas, I would assume. We have to be fiscally responsible. So when you look at this and you look at the second floor, again, that's a very standard. You've got dormitories, you've got bathrooms, you've got a kitchen, a day room, very, very straightforward with a little bit of storage. Nothing too special. I kept out the chocolate fountain that's always going. But you can see where the elevator comes up into the second floor, and you can see where there's a loft for storage on the other side of the bay. These are all great things, and I'd love to I'd absolutely love to have this, but this is probably not the end result we're gonna be, dealing with once it comes to the end of the day. So,
Why is the second floor not the same square footage as the first floor? I see that big X.
because when I talked to McKinsey, they said that the structural, engineering for City Hall would not support, an entire second floor, and that's gonna be a really big thing, because this building, it may be too expensive to have any portion of a second floor over the top of City Hall, which means that we do really need to, keep and restore a chunk of the current fire station, if you will, because it is currently constructed as a two-story, structure, but it does need a lot of current updating for code and structural integrity. So that's gonna come into play, and that's where closing that gap's really gonna be able to increase the square footage to be able to expand, because even tonight, as we sit here, I have an engine crew of 4 available, but I had to pull one of them away because we didn't have enough bedrooms for all 4 of them. So we would be running an engine of 4 tonight if we had the actual bedrooms to house them. And I'm not gonna make somebody sleep in a recliner to keep a status of 4, because that's not right. They need to have a bedroom with a bed and be able to be comfortable and not hurt them waking up with a stiff neck or something. So,
And how does Pac West fit into the upstairs?
they're actually on the first floor, which gives them direct access to their medic units in this drawing, of course, and that doesn't mean that would
Right.
be what it is, but if you see, there's PWA quarters right there,
Oh,
okay.
in the front. And so they would basically come out their door and through the double doors, that's actually an NFPA requirement. We have to have 2 doors between living quarters and vehicle bay. And it would go right to their medic, and they wouldn't be going up and down stairs. The other thing is, a lot of fire districts don't allow people to use, because we want to put in a fire pole for quick access to get downstairs. A lot of people, or a lot of fire districts won't allow non-employees, non-members of the district to use the fire pole because of insurance liability, because they're not covered directly under our insurance. So this is why putting Pac West quarters on the first floor eliminates any desires to use the fire pole for quick access to their medics, and then they end up hurting themselves and they're not covered under our insurance. That's believe it or not, a really big deal.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, fire poles are very, very entertaining to want to use. Let's just put it that way, for getting from the first floor or second floor.
Now, board members are covered under the insurance, right?
Yeah.
Technically, you are.
Yeah.
Yes, technically you are. However, I would highly recommend that only responders use the fire pole when absolutely needed, and not as means to take the lazy way to get down to the bay. That's where policies come
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're dangerous.
in. Yeah.
I watched a guy eat one in Albany one day.
Yep. Yep. If you're not careful, they can be, but the same argument has been put up as stairs. I've seen just as many firefighters fall down stairs in the middle of the night.
Yep.
And at least one's a straight drop and not a drop. all the way
Yeah,
down.
and there's some cushion at the bottom.
Yeah, exactly. There's also code requirements on those, so that if somebody had their, the doorknob has to be 4 foot high, because if somebody had a child over the top, couldn't just open the door to the pole and then, so
Yeah.
there's a lot to it. It's very,
So an application for a grant, what's required?
to apply for the seismic grant, McKinsey will actually do the application on our behalf, in exchange for us signing with an agreement with them for them to do the seismic work. So for us, it would be basically providing them any information they needed to actually complete the grant. That may be information on the community, information on the structure. They have most of the information already because they've already done the eval on the current structure. And then they'll have to obviously include in this 3 floor plans, what it would take the seismic, the entire facility for the new floor plan. So they're gonna have most of the information. Essentially, we're gonna just have a decision of, do we use McKinsey not only for this proposal, but then continuing moving forward as well. Because once we start this evaluation and they have the floor plans and they have, you see what I'm saying? We're already kind of committing ourselves into that one company at this point because they're holding the key on all the details of what we're getting from the evaluations, if that makes sense.
Dead relying on them for the bond and the whole nine yards.
And then, and that's why I wanted him to kind of talk about, you know, campaign assistance, doing outreach with us. They wouldn't just be doing outreach on their own. We would be there side by side, obviously to do the outreach as a combined effort. Doing open houses, we would invite McKinsey in, you know, and have drawings, pictures, posters, anything and everything we could to try to provide that viewpoint for the public that this is what it's going to be when this is all said and done and the construction fences get taken away. So I think that's important for them to know exactly what they're going to get. So,
The community has a relationship of several years with the Ford Foundation, and I know in the past they have given grant money to fire stations too. So that's something we want to explore, not for the seismic, for the actual construction and maybe even the purchase.
yeah, I mean, just because we use a seismic grant doesn't mean that we're eliminated from further grants in the process. There are lots of places we can get grants from. We could throw an AFG grant out even to try to cover the construction costs. Very low success rate, but it's worth a try. There's no harm in trying. The worst thing they'll tell us is no.
Yeah.
Well, and actually having it be a public safety facility might increase our chances in that regard. Because, you know, a lot of times the grantors really like joint projects. You know,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
where you're benefiting several groups.
I know that in the past there was a conversation of doing a joint venture with the U.S. Forest Service to having a station that we would both coast out of. I mean, there's no reason why having a conversation and trying to reopen that door couldn't be a possibility of having a Type 1 or a Type 3 or even a Type 6 engine from the Forest Service housed with us. You know, even if it's seasonal, that there's no reason why we couldn't open those doors. So,
A couple of us were here when we went through that process.
Yeah.
It was very embarrassing.
It was long and painful.
yeah, I wasn't.
But
here,
that
so
was
I don't-
getting their property. That was
Yeah,
us
and
buying
that's
their
the-
property
right.
and then co-locating. and-
Yeah,
Right. I'm just saying that there's other means of opening opportunities. So. Yep.
Well, you know, if we have, put a committee together, start exploring what our options would be with the city, I think that'd be a really good start.
Yeah, so that would need to go on the agenda for the board meeting
Yeah.
so you guys
Sure.
could
Yeah.
make those decisions. Can't make
Sure.
any decisions here today.
Right.
So, but it's good to have the discussion because that makes the board meeting that much shorter.
Yeah.
So you don't have to have a whole nother discussion on it,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
Do
yeah.
we need an executive session on this, on a property? No?
Not for this,
no.
Okay.
because we're two public entities.
Right.
And, you know, at the board meeting, we'll just be talking about who wants to be on the committee
Right.
and, you know, what that might look like at this point. So,
Yeah.
Now, if the board wants to sign the proposal, I think that does have to be an executive session because that's technically a contract.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
So that you keep that in mind as well.
right.
So if you're gonna have any specific yes, no, let's do this conversation, that should probably be completed inside that executive session, I would imagine.
Well, we discussed the contract and, you know, numbers and all that. We'd still have to come out of the session to sign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
It seems like, just my opinion, it seems like an awful lot of money for a proposal. I would rather, if there was a way that we get the city, or to get the bond approved and then spend $60,000.
and,
Knowing that we're, you know, actually have the money to do this.
well, and the reason why we do this now as an option is because the information that's going to come out of this evaluation is what we're going to use to justify the bond, why we need that much money to See, right now, if I was to go and say, I'd really be guessing on how much money it would cost to do this project. I really would, I have no engineering background. I couldn't tell you how much it would cost to build a new vehicle bay to seismic with, you know, all the current codes. So this really gives us the foundation, so when we start to campaign after May, because we don't want to campaign before May and confuse the voters, so they think it's on this ballot, it's actually on the next ballot.
So
This
which ballot would
information
it be
comes
on, the
out.
November ballot?
No, the May of 22 is the one that we targeted when we went through the,
Oh, May of 22 for this?
yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah. So we would start essentially after May and start campaigning and educating and talking with the public. And unfortunately, we're still in the COVID restrictions, at least through June, which really eliminates a lot of like chamber meetings, where you
Even
really
open
want to get up
houses.
in front of that group and you want to say, hey, this is what we're doing. Please give me your feedback. What do you think? You know, and you can still do that over Zoom. It's just kind of missing that charisma and
Right.
you know, that connection with them. But the thing is, we have to get out there. It takes about a year to really get the public to understand that this is what we're trying to do. This is why. This is what it's going to take. And in the end of the day, this is what you're going to get. And not only that, but you're going to get that because it's a 50-year station. It's going to last with the growth of the city over the next 50 years. And nobody's got a magic ball, so we don't know the exact growth, but we know it's going to grow. I mean, if you look at the coast right now, if you look from the north to the south end of the county, it's growing, and it's growing a lot. Our call volume jumped 40% this last year. So it's growing.
So if we spend the 60,000 and get the proposed drawings, et cetera, can we apply for the grant before we get the bond?
Yeah, we'll actually apply for the grant in December, and so when we go out for the bond, we should already have the information that we've been successful or not with the seismic grant, and then that'll help to drive the bond for
Correct.
the taxpayers to know that, hey, we went out, we were successful, we got a grant, and this is offsetting the costs that you would have had to foot if we didn't.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's really gonna help as well with that process.
That was my questions for tonight, so.
I can tell you, Jamie, we moved here almost exactly 50 years ago. And the population of Walport was 725 and Yahats was 450.
Yeah.
So it's more than doubled,
Oh, yeah.
almost tripled.
Yeah, and so if we use the same theoretical data and it tripled again, and if we base that off of the continued growth of our auto aid and mutual aid agreements with neighboring districts and the rest of the county, if you will, you know, we're going to need firefighters, we're going to need to be able to house those firefighters, and we're going to need to be able to have the equipment that's appropriate for doing the job. And the station's really the hub that holds all that and protects all that together. Not only that, but when there's an emergency, we have a storm, you know, fire stations become places of refuge for people. The last time we had a storm and we had a long power outage, we actually brought the public, some members of the public into the station because they didn't have power to power their medical equipment and needed help. And so we brought them in. Not only were we able to do medical screening for them to make sure that there were no issues in that gap, but we are also able to maintain their medical equipment and keep them healthy until the power could be restored and they could go back home again. And people have to understand, you know, is that fire stations become the hub of safety when things happen. So they're gonna come here.
You know, something I've thought about and I've always forgot to bring up. You mentioned people had medical equipment. The PUD used to have a program that if power went out and you had that type of stuff, they would bring you a generator.
Yeah.
right.
And, you know, room is an issue, but what if we talked to the PUD and got some of those generators stored here? Because we're gonna know probably sooner than the PUD who needs them.
Yeah, I mean, if they were needed to come here to get a generator, it'd be almost better for them to stay here and have that monitoring capability on them to keep them safe, but we could do that. One of the big things here is we don't have a generator here that kicks on and fully functions the station when there's an outage. We have a generator that we can turn on and will function some essential parts of the station. And, you know, if we get a multi-day outage, we really need this station to be able to function for that multi-day, not just parts of it. And so, that would be part of this plan, is to think about things like our backup power. Currently, our air compressor system is stored in a container outside, and it's dramatically outdated and barely functioning, almost to the point where we're gonna have to start taking our air bottles over to the Bayshore station to fill them, because that system's just not working. Having an actual contamination-free SCBA room in the station where the compressor can be and can be maintained and keep our air that's coming into that system clean is really important. Because right now it's just coming through a filter on the outside of a metal container that's on the ground outside. So, and there's gonna be dozens of things. You know, the station has no sprinkler system, that's a problem. You know, the station has no fire alarm, so if nobody's here and there's a fire, nobody notices it until their flames are big enough. So, you know, we just, the other day, put in the appropriate amount of smoke detectors to meet the minimum code for smoke detectors. So, you know, this station is, it was built with function for the time it was built in, and we've now advanced 40 years almost, and it's now, with the growth and the function and the codes and what we're operating as, we've outgrown the station.
Okay. Well, we'll make sure it's on the agenda for Thursday night to form a committee and
Yeah.
get in contact with the city and ask them to do the same and get that ball rolling.
Excellent.
And,
Well, and actually, the city council meeting was delayed to the 25th, so our meeting next week would be before that.
Yeah.
It could be brought up at the council meeting on the 25th.
perfect.
Good.
So we have time, we don't need to, I mean, essentially, we don't need to approve this proposal even in the next month.
Right.
I think getting the dialogue open with the city and having some discussions and
Yeah.
knowing some more information would be prudent before even taking consideration into this proposal.
I agree.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. We need lots more answers.
Okay. Well, Unless
But-
anybody's got anything else,
No,
Thank you.
I think we're good.
I just want to remind the guys that we've got roughly 16 months before the